This is George Dion with MetalExpressRadio.com. I'm here with Carl Canedy of the band Canedy. How you doing today, Carl?
I'm doing great, George. Thanks for having me.
I usually start off with the same question. If I knew absolutely nothing about your band Canedy, how would you describe your music to me?
That's always a good question. I'm going to say that we are like traditional metal, but with a modern flair, and that seems to be the way we're described by a number of people. So I guess I would go with that. You know, we all listen to a lot of new bands, and we have influences from our past as well as, you know, current influences. So I think that's all part of what makes up our sound.
Right. Your first album under the Canedy name, Headbanger, was sort of a special guest affair. It was mainly like a solo thing for you. For your latest album, Warrior, you say Canedy is a true band on this effort. How did the change come about?
You know, the first album, Headbanger, was really for myself. I wanted to do an album that showcased my songwriting, that because people don't know that I play guitar and piano and that I write lyrics, I write melodies. So I left my demos. I left a couple of my 30-minute demos, as I call them, that I present to the band, where I play and sing everything, bass, guitar, whatever, if they're keyboards, sing, and present it to the band. So it was about my songwriting. And I didn't want to do another one of those. I loathed the thought of doing another solo. It was, after doing 40 albums, producing myself I was the worst person ever, worst artist I'd ever worked with. So I've been playing for 22 years in a local band called the Jeffrey James Band, and Tony, the bass player in Canedy, who's also a vocalist in his own right, he and I are playing together, and he had a band with with Charlie and Mike called TLC, Totally Lost Cause, and they're re-releasing 2 of their CDs on Heaven and Hell Records that'll be coming up once the pandemic lightens up. So they were doing a TV show, and they were working on material, but I guess the drummer had commitments and wasn't able to make the TV show and wasn't really able to make a lot of rehearsals. So they asked me to fill in. It went great. We started working on material, get together a recording studio once a week, or as often as we could, and through that we wound up writing an album. But also, I think over that period of a year and a half, we became a band. You know, you're working with the guys over and over, and you just learn each other, and you're writing songs, and it just became a cohesive band. So it was a great experience for me, and a much better one than working with that really nasty, unpleasant artist I worked with on the first album.
Yeah, we are our own worst critics, right?
It really was. You know, there's a song on the Headbanger album called My Life, My Way, and I wrote it for my best friend Jim Nunes and for Billy Hilfiger, both of whom, you know, were great friends, and both of whom passed way too early. And I was having trouble with the drum track, so one day I was talking to Rob Reiner. I'm like, Rob, I can't get this drum track. I don't know. So he gave me the producer pep talk, and I went up and sat down and hit record and knocked it out. But, you know, it was just not fun. But the Canedy thing has been great, and Chris Collier mixed it, and we all produced it, and I just, you know, I'm really proud of it. I think it's some of my best drumming. I think it's great songwriting. I think that Tony and Mike have some really interesting lyrics. It's not the same old, you know, it's just some really good things. Tony, the bass player and singer, he's a student of the Roman Empire, and Mike is as philosophical as you can get. He's got some great insights, and he is able to lyrically match up his thoughts and blend them to the music, you know, add them to the music. And so I just think it's a great, I'm just proud of it. And I hate to gush because I hear people who go, this is the best record that's ever been made. And I'm not saying that. I'm just really proud of it from the standpoint that I think as for individuals, I think we created a very solid album, and I'm really proud of it. And I've done a lot of albums, so I don't usually go around touting my accomplishments.
Well, I will say, I mean, I noticed that as far as the songwriting was concerned, it's definitely from I guess I'll use the word mature person's point of view. Mm-hmm. You know, talking about, you know, being a slave to your job or trying to, you know, get back into, you know, the business that, you know, you did as a younger person and trying to get back into it. Kind of like some old historical stuff too, with the tale of Caesar's mother and stuff like that.
Atia.
I think that you'll still find even younger kids kind of getting into stuff like that as well.
I do find that. I find that when I work with younger artists or just knowing them and what they're listening to, I definitely see that they're definitely into traditional metal. You know, they're more open-minded, I think, than maybe some people were 10 years ago in the metal community. So great to see it, that they embrace what we're doing as well as other kinds of music.
So it's common for bands today to kind of each record their parts separately and kind of bring it together, string it along on computer until the album's completed. Is this the way that you guys recorded Warrior?
It was recorded in similar fashion. I mean, we spent so much time working and rehearsing so that we had our parts down. We really had down what we were going to play because we've been playing them as if we had been doing shows. And unfortunately, before the coronavirus, we'd only been able to do one show. But, you know, it was a case of we did record separately, but it has a live feel because we had worked things out so much that we were just basically going in and knocking out our parts. And so it has that band feel. Great.
What songs are you particularly proud of and why? You can't say all of them.
Okay. Well, now I have nothing to say.
Oh, jeez.
No.
Come on, you got a couple of tracks on there where you're going crazy on the drums. So you must love those.
You know, anytime I get to play, you know, my drums, I'm happy. Johnny Zazula. Everybody knows John and Marsha from signing Metallica, Anthrax, Overkill, King's Nest, whatever. Johnny, you know, good friend, and Johnny wound up sequencing the album. And so he chose Do It Now, which was not the first choice we had. But Do It Now has some really great parts. It's some really strong drumming from me, I think, and I'm proud of. And I love Warrior. I love The Prize is a great song. I love Atia. I always loved Atia. That was probably the first song that, you know, I loved from the band. I think that In the Sign, which was actually the original working title of the album, that's a killer tune. That's a really heavy song. But, you know, I can go on and on, you know. So
my favorite was Atia.
Atia, great. You know, and interestingly enough, a lot of people love Atia, and I did too. It was the first song I fell in love with.
It's just that hook. It's got that hook. It doesn't get out of your head.
Mm-hmm. And Tony and Charlie had written that prior to us starting. That was some material they were working on, I guess, when, you know, I hooked up with them. So that was the first song I heard, and I went, we got to do that song. That's great.
Awesome. The song Warrior is about kind of how the U.S. music industry abandoned heavy metal for grunge acts in the 90s. Yet, despite the shift in the States, heavy metal is still popular across the world.
I think for those who didn't know that, for the younger people who you know, just had no clue, it was an earthquake to the music business when it came when that happened. And it's, you know, it's great from the historical perspective as well, but just the fact that once Nirvana hit, it was flannel shirts and no guitar solos. Period. I mean, it was somebody hit a switch and it was over. You know, suddenly all the riffmeisters were done. In the 90s, you were still dealing with record labels. You don't need really a record label anymore for bands to get their product and their music to a market and to find an audience. But back then you did. So now you needed to go through that channel, that bottleneck of a record label. And suddenly that bottleneck was only letting Seattle-type bands pass through. So you're done. You're dead in the water. So it was really a shock to the system for the majority of musicians who were not playing grunge music and had, you know, were trying to play a guitar solo. It just wasn't working.
So do you think that the internet kind of saved heavy metal?
I get this question, but I think it is really true in the sense that it saved artists. I want to say not just heavy metal, but artists in general. I think now if you are creative and you are doing some great music, nobody can stop you. You can make a video on your phone, and you can upload it to YouTube, and you can get your music out there. You can buy inexpensive recording gear for home, and no more waiting to shop it to a label, hoping they'll they'll pick you up. You can go, I can write a song today, you and I can collaborate, you can send me lyrics, I can put some music to it, I can shoot a video, you can shoot a video, we can blend it together, and we can have it on YouTube tomorrow. So that landscape has totally changed for artists, and if they can find an audience, they can now survive without a major label. 20 years ago, not really possible. Very few artists were surviving independently. So anyway, so I think it's really helped the artist in general.
Right.
And you're also not getting what the Rods got. When we first started our second album, we were force-fed material. You've got to do this, you've got to do that song, you know. And in some cases, they were good choices. Mike Bone had a couple of really excellent choices with Nothing Going On in the City for the Rods and Ace in the Hole. But a lot of times there were songs put forth that sucked, you know. And
right.
I mean, it goes back to reading about the Beatles. And in the early days, they were given How Do You Do It? And they're like, that song blows. I'm not doing that song. And they, you know, we're going to write our own songs, you know. So it's gone on forever. But now that doesn't exist. And I think with us writing this material for Canedy, when we got together, the songs went where they went. You know, one of the guys would bring in, usually Tony would bring in, you know, he was a big catalyst in getting things, and then he and Mike would collaborate, and Charlie would come in with a riff, and we'd all work on arrangements and ideas, and the songs would go where they went. There was no time constraints. There were no, oh, we must have it this way, must have it that way. Oh, it's, you know, it would just work on the music, and the music went where it went. And then when we all felt it was like, okay, we're good, it was done. So that was nice because it was total freedom. Exactly.
You mentioned that you guys played one show before the lockdowns. Was there a plan to play a more extensive tour?
We were hoping to do more dates and some local dates, which I think we will do.
Yeah.
Once this breaks, we'll definitely do some local dates. But the whole goal was, I want to get this band to Europe, Japan, South America. You know, this band, I think this band is, Mike as a vocalist is phenomenal, and Mike can just nail it every time. And I think the band, Tony and Charlie, are great. Now, Tony and I have been playing together for 6 years. So from day one, he and I hit it off as a rhythm section. And Tony, we always joke about it in the Jeffrey James band because we do cover material. And we'll bring up songs, and Tony went somewhere, as a youth, he found Black Sabbath album, and he went into a parallel universe, which was all heavy music.
Yeah.
And he never listened to anything commercial. So we'll joke about, hey, Tony, we're going to do this song by this band you've probably never heard called the Beatles, you know, because he just doesn't know that material because he was in a parallel heavy metal universe. All original material and all heavy. So, you know, he and I were a strong rhythm section before we even started this. And, you know, Charlie's a phenomenal guitarist. He's written at least one book that I know of, and I need to ask him about that. You know, he studied with Paul Gilbert, G.I.T. grad. I mean, he's a, you know, brilliant guitarist, and he's great at orchestrating parts. It's not just playing a riff and a little, you know, chugging rhythm. I mean, he orchestrates stuff. So live, the band can pull off the album, which is, you know, in my experience, not always easy to do. So I'm really proud of it. So that's why I think this band in front of an audience that a true heavy metal audience is going to really do well.
Excellent. Last year, you released an album with your other band, The Rods. And I was going to ask you, how do you manage your time between the two bands? But the more I dug into your history and your current history, I realized you have your hand in quite a few bands. So
that I do.
So it's a two-part question. It's one, you know, is this a drummer thing? Because every drummer that I know has like 27 bands he's in, and he's just like, what band am I in today? And then the other part of the question is, how do you manage your time between all the stuff you got going on right now?
You know, I think that I took a page from the Mike Portnoy book, you know, like a few years ago, because Billy Sheehan's a friend of mine, and I went to see him with the Winery Dogs. And then I discovered Portnoy. I had known of him in Dream Theater, and this is certainly no disrespect. He was a phenomenal drummer, always has been. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't like a huge fan of Dream Theater. And, you know, my friend has an agency, and Susan was booking them. And, you know, I could have gone to see them a million times as top tickets, but I just never did. I was like, and my engineer at my studio would play them all the time. And like, yeah, it's good. Great musicianship. but it was too much math for me. I'm like, oh, I can't count like that. It's too much. And so I just didn't get it. But I got him in the Winery Dogs because I realized that the guy is just a total amazing drummer in that he can do it all. And so anyway, I noticed that, he's doing the Winery Dogs. Then he's out with the next project. And, these projects really have a limited lifespan these days in terms of, it's not like back when I started in the 80s, a band would just tour for a year. It's not like that anymore. It's not economically feasible most of the time, unless you're an absolutely huge band. And those bands still pick and choose their time. So in terms of managing time, each project has its lifespan where they're going to go tour and do dates. And then you're down, then you have downtime. So as long as there are no conflicts, everything is good. And I think with Canedy and the Rods, I think that that's a case of even if we did go do a festival, as long as they weren't back-to-back shows, there wouldn't really be an issue.
Right.
Because they're not really the same animal. The Rods are a three-piece anthemic metal machine. It's like, I was liken it to the train leaves the station and just rolls down the track until it just crashes at the end, like it just goes off the tracks by the end of the set, and it doesn't stop anywhere in between. And Kennedy's a whole musical journey, so it's a whole different thing. And Mike's vocals are phenomenal, so different animal.
Mike's singing for both Canedy and the Rods now, correct?
Correct.
Was his addition to the group amicable for everyone involved?
It was. I mean, that was a case of our bass player. Now, David and I in the Rods, we've been together 40 years this year. So it's our 40th anniversary together. And what can I say? David is a really lucky musician in that he's had me with him for 40 years because, he's impossible to get along with, and I am a saint. So... he's lucky we had that 40-year ride, and it's because of me, because of the easygoing personality and, just the sweetness that I ooze in every situation. So, but no, he's been, he and I have had a great relationship all these years, and Gary as well. But Gary retired from the band this year. When the album came out, he was done, and he didn't want to tour any longer, and so that was a very amicable split, but it left us in a position of we wanted to go in a different direction. We had added keyboards to the Brotherhood of Metal album, and we wanted to continue with that direction with keyboards. And we've always written songs that were more in the vein of, with a stronger vocalist, like the Heavier Than Thou album that Shmulek Abigail sings on. Mm-hmm. That was more the direction. David had not only played with Elf, but, he had been with Ronnie forever. He was used to having that type of singer. And so a lot of his songs are written for that type of singer. But, in the Rods, we don't really have the capability of those types of soaring vocals. So when I brought Mike to a Rods rehearsal, and he and David, while I was setting up, getting my gear together, he and David talked for an hour, and it came out, it was, we were talking about auditioning other people we had in mind. Jim Crean was one. We talked about John Gorman. We were just going to see who was a good fit, who wanted to do it. And but when he came out, David was like they had so much in common that it was just a given that Mike was the perfect singer. And then when we played, it was a phenomenal fit. So him singing the old songs, he sounds great and takes them to another level. And then, of course, it allows us to expand on that musically.
Great. You guys working on new Rods material?
We have started. David actually has one song. We're looking at a couple of other tunes, and we'll probably start with recording 3 songs first. So we'll be doing that soon. Next couple of weeks, we'll start to get to it because this is, we're all getting back to some type of new normalcy.
Back to business, yes.
Yeah.
New normalcy. That's the key.
New
normalcy. We'll see where that leads us, right?
Yeah, we'll see. At least it's going to lead us back to a lockdown. But, until that happens, I'm going to make the most of it.
Exactly. I read in Modern Drummer that Carmine Appice was one of your drum teachers.
He was.
What do you remember about that experience?
Well, Carmine, I was fortunate enough to study with Carmine and Tony Williams. But Carmine, I'm trying to think. When I first started playing drums, I had a teacher who told me that I sucked. And he was very negative. He was very arrogant. And I realized later on, as I was able to play a little bit and got a better feel for drumming, and, you know, I realized he was a really mediocre drummer with a big chip on his shoulder. But he would tell me, like, he would just say nasty things, you know, and he was a NARD drummer, which was National Association of Rudimental Drummers. And I thought, wow, that's so cool. I'd love to strive for that. And maybe one day I could do that. No, you'll never get that. And so the day I got that was like a big F you to, like, here you go, buddy. It's, you know, let me show this to you. But Carmine, when I came to Carmine, so I had stopped taking lessons because I'm not really bright, but I was bright enough to figure out that after a while, giving money to somebody who says bad things about you and to you, it doesn't make any sense. So I stopped. So then I was on my own, just studying from records and, you know, learning what I could on my own. Mm-hmm. So when I got to Carmine, I had lots of enthusiasm and also some bad habits. And Carmine was just such a great educator. He took me through books. He took me through realistic rock and syncopation and so on. But he would say to me, that's wrong, but keep that because that's cool, you know, or let's try this. And he goes, you know, you're working really hard. You know, relax a little, balance your kit. And, you know, he said something that I pass on to all young drummers. And here I am at a later stage in my life, you know, basically old. And it's so true because what he said was I would drive from Boston for double lessons. And there was a student in front of me who had glitter sneakers and was he was basically there for the look, you know, and all I could hear in Carmine's house was, it was a little house and it was empty and you could hear him from the room. And I just want to play fast. I just want to play fast. And so I asked Carmine about it and he said, you know, if you're not playing because you love it, if you're playing because you want to get laid, you want to get rich, you want to be famous, you know, none of that stuff may not happen for you. But if you play because you love it, you know, you're going to be happy your whole life about playing drums. And it was a great advice, and it's very simple advice, but it's so true. And, you know, here I am waking up every day wanting to play drums, and that's all, you know, I want music in my life and I want to play drums. So Carmine was really great, and he was just a huge influence. And the other thing was that he was a huge influence in that I loved the bands he was with, and I loved his style and his showmanship. And so it was a great honor to actually study with him. And I can say without a doubt that he was the big change in my drumming. Without him, I would not have become the drummer I've become. And that's not saying I'm a great drummer, but saying that I wouldn't be the drummer I am without that. And Tony Williams was basically, we got to a point with Tony Williams where I would go to his place, and he owned apartment houses in New York. He was a smart guy, a good business guy, and he invested well. And so he could play in his apartment house in New York City, and nobody complained because he owned the building. Which is for a drummer, that's a big thing.
Right.
But eventually he was really breaking my balls about, can I say that? I don't know.
Yeah, you can say, sure.
I don't want to insult anyone, but anyway, so playing traditional grip, which I play a little bit, but not really live. I just play it sometimes for fun, or if it's depending on the gig, I might switch to traditional. But overall, I've always played match grip. So Tony's like, you've got to play it this way, and his thing was to really lock down my ring and little finger, and was really breaking my balls on this lesson after lesson after lesson. So I go see him at the Bottom Line, and I see him in both shows, and after I'm like, that was phenomenal. But, dude, not one time did you use traditional grip. And he just laughed. He goes, I just want you to know it, you know. I want you to know it. So after that, my lessons with Tony were really about interpreting music and his approach. And I still use it, things I discussed with him and his whole philosophy about music. I use it to this day when I produce. So they turned into philosophical discussions about music as opposed to drum lessons. And I did get to play the iconic mustard color set, the yellow set, and with the windows open, which made me a little uncomfortable. But he didn't care, and I guess even if somebody else did, it didn't matter. They weren't going to say anything because they'd have to move. But it was a good experience. But it was an interesting one that when I looked back on it, that it was really became more about approach to music than it did about the drums, whereas Carmine was all about the drums.
Right. It's good to have those two contrasting kind of teachers, I think.
I feel fortunate and grateful that I had them.
You've played a lot of shows in your life. What would you say was your worst gig?
The worst gig was a few years ago with Exciter at, I was in New York City. David's amp wasn't working, and I hadn't had that. Normally I warm up for like an hour before the show. And I just wasn't able to warm up. It was one of the worst it was the worst Rod show ever.
Yeah.
And I was talking with Alan about it, the bass player in Exciter, about he had experienced one, because I had said that was the worst show ever, and it was just such a drag. And he's like, well, I had one myself recently. After it was a couple years later, but he's telling me, he goes, wow, it's just such a bad feeling. I'm like, I know, I still traumatized from it. And it wasn't like the show didn't go down well, but it was like 12 minutes, or which when you're on stage and you got a 40-minute set, 12 minutes out of your set.
It's a long time.
And you're just standing there, and the whole crowd is sold out, and it's just embarrassing. And so, anyway, that was my worst show.
So, what was your best? What's your greatest show, do you think?
A lot of great shows, and they range from arena shows to clubs, little clubs. But I think one of the memorable ones for me is when we opened for Blue Oyster Cult. It was our first show in an arena, in Binghamton Arena, and so I'd always seen drummers wail their sticks out into the audience after shows. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to do that. That's the greatest thing. I'm going to wail those sticks as far as I can. And so after the show, I'm like wailing the sticks out. And I'm like, wow, this is so great. The crowd loved us. And, it was kind of a hometown thing. Not that, those 8,000 or 9,000 people who were there actually knew the Rods, but a lot of people did know the Rods were there. So we had a favorable, we were favored nations in that particular crowd. But so I throw the sticks out, and I'm like, this is great. And I get off the stage, and my manager goes, don't ever do that again. That's a lawsuit. Don't even think about that anymore. It was like from the ultimate high to like, yes, I can throw my sticks out, and I'm badass too. I'm ashamed and humiliated now, and now my dream is crushed.
That's funny.
So, but it was a great show. And they were at their peak, and it was a killer show. And then watching them backstage after, side stage, was like, wow, these guys are great.
Nice. So, is there anything you miss about being in a band in the 80s?
Boy, that's a really loaded question, which now that, I have a daughter, I'm not going to say. But there are things I miss from being single and on the road in a band called the Rods in the 80s. But no, I think there was a camaraderie that I miss. And, David and Gary and I, and before that, Steve Starmer and David and I, when we started, we were living on $5 a day, and we started recording the album 6 months after we began, and we were clearing clubs, and people hated us because it was still, the Bee Gees were still on the charts, and so we would come in, long hair, fire up amps, just playing horrible music, and they just hated us. People, literally, we would clear clubs. By the end of the first set, it was over. There was like almost no one there. If we didn't have a big road crew, we had 5 in our road crew, 3 on stage, 5 in the road crew. We wouldn't have had an audience sometimes. Like, oh, there are 5 people out there. It's worth playing the rest of the night. And so as the crowds built, that changed, and it was great. But it was the camaraderie that we all had with the crew and, within the band. And, Steve we had $5 a day for food, and Steve bought cigarettes out of that. So things were tight.
Yeah.
And but we built our gear. We built the cabinets. I built my drum monitors. David built cabinets. He still has those walls of cabinets. And then with Gary, all the years of playing, and a lot of fun and a big camaraderie. And it's you against the world. And I miss that in terms of just you're young, and it's us against the world, and you're kicking ass as best you can, and it's fun.
Right.
So, like building a treehouse with your friends when you're a little kid.
That's right. What's the one album that you have in your collection that heavy metal fans would be surprised to know you have?
I think there's a Poco CD or something somewhere.
Poco? Not bad.
No, there's some great songs. I write a lot of different songs. There's a song on YouTube called Say Your Prayers that my friend Sarah sang. Mm-hmm. And I wrote it for my daughter. She was having a very difficult relationship with one of her boyfriends who, I think it was the third one, where when I came home and they were on the couch and he was lying there with his head in her lap, and I walk in, I'd never met him, and instead of getting up to shake my hand, he looks at me and goes, "Sup?" And so, as I always told her, do not bring me home when your boyfriend. Do not bring me home. And so after that, I just said, the next guy you bring in who says "sup" to me, it's a big problem for that guy. Which fortunately now she's got a great guy, and it's, all that's behind us. She was having a bad relationship, and so I wrote the song "Say Your Prayers." But I write a lot of different types of music, so it's not just heavy. So for me to have a Poco CD or that kind of songwriting in my collection isn't a big stretch if you hear songs like "Say Your Prayers." So I think if anyone wants to go on YouTube and look up Canedy and Sarah singing "Say Your Prayers," I mean, that's give you an idea of why that type of music is in. But I have a big palette of music that I love. If it's good, if it's really good, I love it. I don't like hokey music at all, but if it's good and passionate, I like it.
I'm pretty sure Poco falls into yacht rock these days, and that's pretty popular amongst people, I think.
Yacht rock, that's right. It does fall into that, doesn't it?
I think so.
As soon as Kohl's opens up, I'm going to go get some white deck shoes and start playing Poco.
Perfect. On your first album, you had Ronnie James Dio guest star on a bonus track, and this is the 10th anniversary of his passing. You got any memories of him recording that track with you?
I have a lot of memories of that, and Ronnie came in. It was right after they had done Radio City Music Hall, and he was going to sing 2 songs on David's album, and David was gracious enough to say, you know what, the code that I had written is a great song for Ronnie to sing, so Ronnie should sing that song. And he sang that song for me. He sang Metal Will Never Die, and that became a song on David's album, Bitten by the Beast. And the code with Ronnie was on the Vengeance album. Of course, when I did my album, I wanted it on there as part of my songwriting. I've actually never promoted the fact that I put that track on my album. I'm just not comfortable trying to cash in on Ronnie in any way. He was such a great guy. He's one of the greatest heavy metal singers of all time, if not the greatest. And I had known Ronnie and known David. I was in a band called Raw Meat, which had the world's worst name at the time, and still pretty bad. It'd be a good death metal name now. Raw Meat would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
But back then, like the Elves, there was a band Wool here. Some of these bands like that, and then there was Raw Meat. But Raw Meat was a great band, great musicians. David Porter from 805, was in the band, as well as Brian Jolio, some great musicians. Anyway, I had known Ronnie. I had gone to see them prior to that when they were doing high school dances, and I would go see them, and everybody would dance at high school dances. But when Elf played, everybody sat on the floor and just watched because it was a concert. So having Ronnie come in, even though I had known him all those years and was part of my DNA musically because I was a huge fan, him coming in, he was so respectful, took the code, he took the song, he was true to my melodies. If he wanted to change something, he would ask, and I was like, look, you have carte blanche, whatever you want to do, just take it and run. But he was very respectful, and he didn't have to be, but he was very amazing. And David had always told me about Ronnie, that Ronnie was a one-take guy. Now, I've worked with great singers, all these years producing, and I love working with vocalists. And, nobody's a one-take, like perfect every time. You're trying
right.
things. And Ronnie was a one-take guy. And I was like, oh, David, it's like how many years ago was that, we recorded with Ronnie? And, memories always get fuzzy and cute and happy. And, that you forget all the bad stuff and just that sweet little rose-colored glasses vision comes through as the years go by, right?
Right.
But in this case, he was dead on. Ronnie, he sang, I think, two things differently, but not because they weren't correct. They were different. And there was no melodyning, anything he sang. It was just the way he sang it. And so it was incredible to watch that, just because I've worked with so many singers, and I know that that's how it goes. But that's how it went with Ronnie. And David was right on the money about it. He was a one-take guy. He knew what he was going to do and knocked it out. But what control of his instrument. And, prior to that, we had seen a couple of shows, besides the Radio City. We saw them in Binghamton. And so we're hanging with him in the dressing room and before the show. And then he goes, okay, guys, come on, let's go. I'm going to change my shirt, and it's time to go out. No vocal warm-up. He goes out. We're on the side of the stage. It's incredible. Like, it was so loud. Like, when Geezer was playing, it was so loud. I couldn't believe it. And then Tony fires up. I couldn't even hear Geezer. That's how loud Tony was. And so I couldn't even hear the bass. Like, oh, my God. But Ronnie, by the end of the show, he was screaming his balls off like he was 18 years old. I could not believe it. I could not believe that at his age, how he was singing. I mean, he was just top of his game the whole time. And so, yeah, I have nothing but great memories and a career highlight for me that Ronnie would actually sing a song that I had written. You know, I mean, how much better does that get?
It's awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that I didn't touch upon?
No, I think I want to say that, and I always say this, you know, that when we perform live, you know, fans come up and sometimes they're shy and they don't want to, and you know, they're just uncomfortable about it. But I love meeting fans when they come. When we play a show, somebody wants to come and talk to me and say hi. I love that. I've made some really good friends from around the world. As a result, some of them have come out on tour and they'll come and travel with us for a week or 2 weeks or whatever. So come and say hi. You don't have to be shy about that. It's not like I'm going to be an unpleasant person. And I've experienced some of that with some of my idols where they've been unpleasant. But I try to never be unpleasant when someone wants to say hi. And, you know, and I appreciate them being there. So, and the other is that, you know, you can always go to, for any info, you can go to therods.com. And I think at this point I'm so proud of this album, you know, it's the CanadyBand.com, and you can check everything out. You can do download, order vinyl, you can order CD, but it's CANEDY band.com. So in case you're trying to go with the old President Kennedy, it's spelled CANEDY. And, you know, I want to thank you because at this time for the support, because at this time, the way things are, you know, you are the voice. I mean, there are no shows. And,
right.
You know, this is the only way to get the word out. And, you know, I really appreciate it, George. It's really, you know, it's important. And it's an important thing you're doing, but I really am grateful because with this new album, we're essentially a new band. And that's a big hurdle for guys who've been around for a while, making new music, trying to get that heard. So thank you.
Hey, no problem.